Amy had always known she was different. Born into a proud and traditional wolf pack, she had never shifted into her wolf form, an act that most wolves celebrated as a rite of passage. Her parents, overprotective and secretive, had warned her against transforming, though they never gave her a clear reason why. "Stay safe, Amy," they would always say, as if the world outside their home posed an unseen danger. Her days were monotonous, spent within the walls of their modest pack house. While others trained, hunted, and forged bonds within the pack, Amy lived in isolation. Her only companions were the endless stream of TV shows she binge-watched and the comfort of food. As the years passed, her once lithe figure became softer, rounder, a stark contrast to the lean and agile wolves in the pack. The whispers never stopped. "She's not fit to be one of us. Can you imagine her as Luna? What a joke. She doesn't even have the strength to shift." The harsh words of the pack stung, but nothing hurt more than the silent disdain of her mate, Lucas. As the future alpha, he was everything Amy was not: strong, disciplined, and adored by all. Their bond was undeniable, but Lucas had never acknowledged her as his mate. To him, she was a source of shame, an imperfection in his otherwise perfect image. Amy felt the weight of his judgment every time they crossed paths. He never spoke to her directly, but his cold stares and dismissive attitudes spoke volumes. She often wondered why the moon goddess would bind them together. What cruel twist of fate had made her the mate of someone who clearly wanted nothing to do with her? On the rare occasions Amy ventured into the pack's communal areas, she could feel the stares and hear the stifled laughter. The pack's warriors trained tirelessly in the open fields, their movements fluid and powerful. Amy stayed in the shadows, watching them with a mixture of awe and longing. She wished she could be one of them, to feel the strength of her wolf and the camaraderie of the pack. But her reality was far from that dream. Her parents, though kind, were distant when it came to her struggles. They encouraged her to stay strong and reminded her that her bond with Lucas would eventually solidify, but Amy had lost faith in those words. She was tired of waiting for a future that seemed increasingly out of reach. Little did she know her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The night was still, the moon casting a silver glow over the pack's gathering hall. It had been a rare event for Amy to attend. Her parents had insisted she join, saying it would be good for her to connect with others. But as usual, she felt out of place, standing at the edges of the crowd, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. Lucas was there, commanding the room with his presence. The future alpha was the epitome of power and grace, his every movement drawing attention. Amy tried to avoid his gaze, but the pull of the mate bond was stronger than her resolve. Her eyes kept finding him even as she tried to stay invisible. Lucas, however, noticed her. For reasons she couldn't understand, he approached her that evening, his golden eyes locking onto hers. The crowd parted for him as if the universe itself made space for his authority. Amy's heart raced, the mate bond thrumming in her chest like a second heartbeat. "Amy," he said, his voice low and smooth, "come with me." Her mind screamed at her to refuse, to stay rooted where she was, but the bond compelled her to follow him. He led her to a quiet spot on the outskirts of the pack's territory, the air thick with tension. "I don't know why," Lucas began, his voice strained, "but I can't fight this bond tonight." Before she could respond, he closed the distance between them, and the power of the mate bond surged between them, overwhelming her senses. For the first time, Amy felt wanted, truly wanted, and she surrendered to the moment. To her, it was everything. For the first time, she believed Lucas saw her for who she was, beyond the whispers and judgment. She thought he was finally accepting her as his mate, as the moon goddess intended. But morning shattered her fragile hope. Amy stirred awake, a soft smile playing on her lips, only to find Lucas sitting on the edge of the bed, his back to her. His shoulders were tense, his posture rigid. "Lucas?" she asked, her voice hesitant. He turned to face her, his expression cold and unrecognizable. His eyes, which had once glimmered with warmth, now looked at her with disgust. His gaze raked over her body, and his lips curled into a sneer. "This was a mistake," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I don't know what came over me, but it won't happen again." Amy's breath hitched, her heart pounding painfully in her chest. "But I thought—" "You thought what?" he snapped, standing abruptly. "That this meant something? Look at yourself, Amy. You're not what I need. You never were." Each word was like a dagger to her heart. The tears she tried to hold back spilled freely, her sobs breaking the silence of the room. Lucas didn't stay to comfort her. He left, slamming the door behind him, leaving her alone with the shattered pieces of her soul. Desperate to escape the suffocating walls of the pack house, Amy fled into the forest, her tears blinding her path. The sting of rejection cut deeper than any wound, and all she could think of was getting as far away as possible. As she stumbled through the trees, her knees gave out and she collapsed to the ground, her body trembling with grief. But amid her despair, a strange warmth spread through her abdomen, a sensation so faint that she almost missed it. It wasn't just her grief she felt. It was something else, something new, something alive. The realization struck her like a bolt of lightning. She was pregnant. With trembling hands, Amy cradled her stomach. She wasn't alone anymore. For the sake of her child, she vowed to be strong. For the first time, she felt a spark of determination ignite within her. Her journey was just beginning. The forest was both beautiful and unforgiving, its towering trees casting dappled shadows on the ground as the sunlight filtered through. Amy had wandered deep into its heart, far from the pack's territory. Days turned into weeks as she struggled to survive, her grief and fear slowly giving way to a burning need to protect the life growing inside her. The bond between her and her unborn child strengthened her resolve. She was no longer the broken wolf Lucas had cast aside. Her baby needed her, and she would not let her mate's rejection define her. But survival was no easy task. Amy had never been trained to hunt, fight, or defend herself. Hunger gnawed at her belly, and every rustle of leaves made her heart race with fear. She realized she had no choice. She needed to transform into her wolf form, something she had avoided all her life. Her parents' warnings echoed in her mind, but she pushed them aside. This wasn't about fear anymore. It was about survival. One moonlit night, Amy stood by a clear stream, her reflection staring back at her. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and called on her wolf for the first time. The shift was painful, her body protesting after years of suppression. Bones cracked and realigned, muscles stretched, and fur erupted across her skin. When it was over, she stood trembling, but she was no longer just Amy. She was a wolf. Her wolf was unlike any she had ever seen. Massive, with a silvery gray coat and piercing amber eyes, she radiated power. But her movements were clumsy, her steps unsure. She had to learn quickly, for the forest would not wait for her to adjust. The first hunt was a disaster. She had spotted a rabbit and lunged clumsily, only to miss and fall face-first into the dirt. Frustrated and hungry, she tried again and again, each failure teaching her something new. Her determination grew, and by the third night she caught her first meal, a small but satisfying catch that gave her the strength to keep going. The forest began to change her. The constant movement and hunting slimmed her once round body, and the physical exertion strengthened her muscles. Her endurance increased and her senses sharpened. The Amy who had been confined to her pack house, mocked and scorned, was fading away. Her wolf became an extension of herself, a fierce, protective side she never knew she had. She howled at the moon, her voice echoing through the trees, a declaration to the world that she was still here, still fighting. But the forest was not without danger. One evening, as Amy rested near a stream, she sensed a presence watching her. A pair of glowing eyes appeared in the shadows, followed by the hulking form of a rogue wolf. He snarled, baring his teeth, and Amy's instincts screamed at her to run. But she didn't. For the first time, Amy stood her ground. Her wolf surged forward and she met the rogue's challenge head-on. The fight was brutal, her inexperience showing as the rogue's claws raked across her side. But her determination and sheer will to protect her unborn child drove her. She managed to outmaneuver him, her newfound strength surprising even herself, and she delivered a decisive blow that sent the rogue retreating into the woods. Panting and bloodied, Amy stood victorious. For the first time she felt proud of herself, not just for surviving but for fighting back. That night, as she gazed up at the stars, she whispered a promise to her baby. "I will protect you. No matter what." She wasn't the same Amy anymore. The weak, heartbroken girl was gone. In her place stood a mother, a fighter, and a wolf who was ready to reclaim her place in the world. Days after her fight with the rogue wolf, Amy continued to push herself. Each step, each hunt, and each howl made her stronger. Her body adapted quickly. Her muscles hardened, her movements became fluid, and her instincts sharpened. However, loneliness weighed heavily on her. She had no one to share her victories or her fears, and her growing belly made her even more protective and cautious. One evening, while exploring deeper into the forest, Amy stumbled across a hidden clearing. The scent of wolves lingered in the air and she froze, her ears twitching. Before she could retreat, several figures emerged from the shadows, wolves of varying sizes, all scarred and hardened by life outside the confines of a structured pack. Rogues. The largest of them, a midnight black wolf with a jagged scar over his eye, stepped forward and shifted into his human form. His deep voice carried authority but lacked the condescension she had grown used to. "You've been in our territory for days. Why are you here?" Amy hesitated but shifted as well, standing tall despite her nerves. "I didn't know this was your territory. I'm just trying to survive." The wolves exchanged glances. They could see she was no ordinary rogue. Her size and aura were striking, and her rounded belly didn't go unnoticed. "You're pregnant," the black wolf said, his tone softening. "You'll need help if you want to make it out here." Amy bristled. "I don't need anyone's help." The black wolf smirked. "You're strong, I'll give you that. But strength alone won't keep you alive, not with a pup on the way." Reluctantly, Amy agreed to stay with them at least temporarily. She didn't trust them fully, but she knew her child's safety came first. The rogue pack was unlike any she had known. They weren't bound by rigid hierarchies or traditions. Each wolf contributed in their own way, and they looked out for one another because they chose to, not because they had to. It was messy and chaotic, but it worked. Amy quickly realized that while she had grown strong, she still had much to learn. The rogues taught her how to fight strategically, not just with brute strength. They taught her how to move silently through the forest, how to blend into the shadows, and how to defend herself and her pup without hesitation. Her mentor, a wiry she-wolf named Zara, was particularly tough on her. "You've got power," Zara said during a sparring session, "but power without skill is just wasted potential. You want to survive? Then fight like your life, and your pup's life, depends on it." Amy trained harder than she ever thought possible. Her movements became precise, her reflexes lightning fast. The once clumsy wolf who couldn't catch a rabbit was now a force to be reckoned with. The rogues began calling her Iron Wolf, a name she carried with pride. As the weeks turned into months, Amy felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. The rogues accepted her for who she was without judgment or ridicule. They saw her strength, her determination, and her heart. But even in this newfound haven, Amy couldn't escape her past. She still dreamed of Lucas, of his cruel words and the pack that had cast her aside. She wondered if they ever thought of her, if they even cared that she was gone. One evening, as she sat by the fire with Zara and the others, her hand resting protectively on her growing belly, the black wolf approached her. His name was Kieran, the leader of the rogues. "You've changed a lot since you got here," he said, his tone thoughtful. Amy nodded. "I had to. For my baby." Kieran studied her for a moment. "You're stronger than most wolves I've met, Amy. But strength isn't just about fighting. It's about knowing when to face your past and when to let it go." His words lingered in her mind long after he walked away. Amy realized that while she had grown stronger, she still carried the weight of Lucas' rejection and the pack's disdain. If she was truly going to be the mother her child deserved, she needed to confront her past, not for them but for herself. The Iron Wolf was ready to reclaim her story. Lucas sat in his office, staring out the large window that overlooked the pack's training grounds. Warriors sparred below, their movements precise and coordinated, but his mind was elsewhere. It had been months since Amy had disappeared, and he hadn't thought much of it at first. After all, she was just Amy. Weak, unworthy of being his Luna, or so he'd believed. But now something about her absence unsettled him. The mate bond, though dulled by his rejection, still tugged faintly at his heart, a constant reminder of what he had thrown away. "Alpha?" His beta, Ryan, entered the room cautiously. "What is it?" Lucas asked, his tone sharp. "There have been rumors," Ryan said, stepping forward. "Rogues have been spotted near the northern border. They've been organized." Lucas raised an eyebrow. Rogues were rarely organized, usually scattered and chaotic. "Organized? By who?" Ryan hesitated. "We're not sure yet. but some of the warriors claimed to have seen a large silver wolf among them, a female. Strong. Fierce. The description sent a shiver down Lucas' spine, though he quickly dismissed it. It couldn't be her. Amy was gone and she was far from fierce. Send patrols to keep watch, Lucas ordered, shaking off the uneasy feeling. We won't let rogues threaten the pack. As Ryan left, Lucas leaned back in his chair, his thoughts drifting once more to Amy. He remembered the last time he had spoken to her, the look of heartbreak on her face. For the first time, guilt began to creep into his mind. What if he had been wrong about her? Meanwhile, the pack was beginning to fracture under his leadership. Lucas had always been a strong alpha, but his cold demeanor and focus on strength above all else were starting to alienate his people. They needed a Luna, a true leader who could balance his authority with compassion. And the pack elders weren't blind to the growing unrest. Lucas, Elder Miriam said during a council meeting, the pack needs stability. You must find your Luna and secure the future of this pack. I don't need anyone, Lucas replied curtly. Miriam's gaze was piercing. You rejected the mate the moon goddess chose for you. Do you really believe there won't be consequences? Her words hit deeper than Lucas cared to admit. Though he didn't say it aloud, he wondered if the growing rogue presence near their borders was somehow tied to his decision to reject Amy. The bond between mates was sacred, and rejecting it often came at a cost. Amy stood on the edge of the rogue camp, the cool evening breeze ruffling her silver fur. She had grown accustomed to her wolf form, moving with a grace and power she never thought possible. The rogues now looked to her as a leader, their respect earned through her strength and unwavering determination. Her belly had grown round with her pregnancy, but it didn't slow her down. If anything, it fueled her drive. Every decision she made, every battle she fought, was for her unborn child. Yet a part of her heart ached for closure, for the life she had left behind. Amy, Kieran's voice broke her thoughts. The black wolf shifted into his human form, his scarred face illuminated by the moonlight. The scouts returned. There's movement along the southern border. Your old pack is sending patrols closer to our territory. Her wolf bristled at the mention of her former home. Let them come, she said, her voice steady. I'm not the same wolf they cast aside. Kieran crossed his arms. You don't have to face them, you know. You've built something here, a family. The pack doesn't deserve to see what you've become. Amy shook her head. It's not about them. It's about me. I need to face them, not for revenge but to let go of what they made me feel. I can't raise my child with the weight of that rejection on my shoulders. Kieran nodded, his respect for her growing. Then we stand with you. Whatever you decide, we're behind you. The next day, Amy prepared herself for what was to come. She shifted into her human form, her toned body a testament to the months she had spent training. She wore simple clothes, but her posture and aura were regal. She was no longer the timid girl Lucas had rejected. Zara approached her, handing her a dagger. Just in case, the she-wolf said with a smirk. Amy smirked back. I'll try not to need it. As the sun set, Amy and a small group of rogues made their way to the southern border. The closer they got, the more her heart pounded. Memories of her time in the pack house, of Lucas' rejection, and of the whispers that had haunted her flooded her mind. But she pushed them aside. When they reached the border, Amy stopped. She could feel the presence of the patrols nearby. Her wolf stirred, ready to confront them, but Amy held back. She wanted them to see her for who she had become. It didn't take long for the patrols to appear. 3 wolves emerged from the shadows, their postures tense. One of them shifted into his human form, his eyes narrowing when he saw Amy. Amy, the man said, disbelief coloring his voice. He recognized him, Ryan Lucas Beta. Yes, she said simply, her voice calm but firm. Ryan's eyes swept over her, taking in the changes. You've changed. I have, Amy replied, meeting his gaze steadily. I'm not here to fight. I want to speak with Lucas. Ryan hesitated. He won't be happy to see you. Amy's lips curled into a small smile. I'm not here for his happiness. I'm here for closure. Ryan exchanged a glance with the other patrol wolves before nodding. I'll take you to him. As Amy crossed the border into the territory she once called home, her resolve hardened. She wasn't the weak, timid wolf they had known. She was the Iron Wolf, and she was ready to face whatever came next. The pack house loomed before Amy as she walked into the heart of her former home. Memories of her time here flooded back. The whispers, the mocking gazes, and the pain of rejection. But now she was different. She held her head high, her shoulders squared, every step exuding confidence. The rogues who had accompanied her remained at the borders, respecting her need to face this alone. Amy didn't need a guard. She was more than capable of standing her ground. Ryan led her through the corridors until they reached the Alpha's office. He paused at the door, hesitating. "Are you sure about this?" Amy nodded. "More sure than I've ever been." With a sigh, Ryan opened the door. Lucas was seated at his desk, surrounded by papers, his expression hard and focused. At the sound of footsteps, he looked up, his golden eyes locking onto Amy. For a moment he froze, his gaze flickering over her. The changes in her were undeniable. Her toned, muscular form, the confidence in her stance, and the fiery determination in her eyes were nothing like the Amy he had known. "Amy," he said, his voice low, a mixture of shock and something else, something he couldn't quite name. "Lucas," she replied coolly, stepping inside. "What are you doing here?" His tone was sharp, defensive, as though he were trying to regain control of the situation. "I'm here for closure," Amy said, her voice calm but firm. "I've spent months running from the past you forced on me. But I'm not running anymore." Lucas stood, his towering frame radiating authority. "You left the pack. You have no right to return." Amy chuckled bitterly. "I left because you made it clear I wasn't wanted. You rejected me, Lucas, but you didn't just reject me. You rejected your mate, the one chosen by the moon goddess." Her words hit him like a blow. The weight of the bond, faint as it was, stirred within him. He clenched his fists. "You were weak. How could I lead with someone like you by my side?" Amy took a step closer, her amber eyes blazing. "Weak? Look at me now, Lucas. Do I look weak to you?" The room was thick with tension as they stared each other down. For the first time, Lucas saw her for what she truly was. Strong, fearless, and commanding. "I've trained. I've fought. I've survived in ways you couldn't imagine," Amy continued. "I came here to tell you that you no longer have power over me. Your rejection doesn't define me. I define myself." Lucas struggled to form a response. The Amy he had known was gone, replaced by someone who stood equal if not greater than him. And for the first time he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel before: regret. Before he could speak, Amy dropped the final bombshell. "And just so you know, I'm carrying your child." Lucas' eyes widened, his composure breaking. "What?" "You heard me," Amy said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to spill over. "But don't think for a second that I'm here to ask for anything from you. My baby doesn't need a father who can't even see the worth of his mate." Lucas looked at her, his mind racing. The guilt, the regret, the bond, it was all too much. But before he could respond, Amy turned on her heel. "I've said what I came here to say," she called over her shoulder. "The rest is on you, Lucas. I don't need you, and neither does my child." With that, she walked out, leaving Lucas standing in stunned silence. For the first time, he was forced to confront the consequences of his actions. Amy didn't look back as she left the pack house, her head high and her heart pounding. She had said her piece, and though it had taken every ounce of courage, she felt lighter than she had in months. Her child deserved a mother who wasn't weighed down by the past, and now she could fully embrace that future. As she crossed the border back into rogue territory, Zara was waiting for her. "How did it go?" Zara asked, her arms crossed but her voice gentle. Amy exhaled deeply. "I told him everything. About my growth, my strength, and the baby." Zara's eyebrows shot up. "And how did he take it?" Amy smirked faintly. "Exactly how I thought he would, shocked, guilty, but unwilling to admit he was wrong. I don't expect anything from him. I just needed to let him know that I'm not the same wolf he rejected." Zara clapped a hand on Amy's shoulder. "Good. Now let's focus on what's next." Back at the pack house, Lucas sat in his office, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. Amy's words replayed in his head, each one striking deeper than the last. She was carrying his child, a child he had unknowingly abandoned the moment he rejected her. His beta, Ryan, entered cautiously, sensing the storm brewing in his alpha. "Lucas, the council wants to speak with you about Amy's return." Lucas' jaw tightened. "What do they want now?" "They're concerned," Ryan said carefully. "Amy's transformation. It's shaken them. They see her strength and they're questioning why you rejected her in the first place. Some even think you made a mistake that could weaken the pack. Lucas growled lowly. She's a rogue now. She's not part of this pack anymore. Ryan tilted his head. But she was chosen by the moon goddess. That bond doesn't just disappear. You might have rejected her, but she's still connected to us, whether you like it or not. Lucas slammed his fist on the desk. I don't need a lecture, Ryan. Ryan sighed. This isn't just about you, Lucas. It's about the pack. The council is considering reaching out to Amy, maybe even offering her a place back here. If she's willing. The thought of Amy returning on her own terms, stronger and more respected than ever, twisted something deep inside Lucas. For the first time he realized he wasn't angry at her. He was angry at himself. Meanwhile, Amy returned to her training with renewed vigor. She had proven to herself that she could face her past, and now she was determined to secure her future. Her strength had grown exponentially, but she knew that motherhood would bring its own challenges. One evening as she sat by the fire with Zara and Kieran, she felt the first kick from her baby. Her hand flew to her belly, her eyes widening in wonder. They're strong, Zara said with a smile. Amy nodded, tears pricking her eyes. They're going to need to be. I'll make sure of it. Kieran leaned back, his gaze thoughtful. You've come a long way, Amy. You're not just surviving, you're thriving. And it's inspiring not just for you but for everyone here. Amy smiled faintly. I couldn't have done it without you all. This place, this family, it's given me more than I ever thought I'd have. But even as she spoke, she couldn't ignore the faint tug of the mate bond. It was weaker now, almost imperceptible, but it was still there, lingering like a shadow. For Amy, her journey wasn't over. She had faced her past, but the future, her child's future, still lay ahead. And she was determined to meet it head-on, no matter what challenges came her way. Amy stood at the edge of the forest, her heart heavy with the weight of the choices before her. The sounds of the rogue camp seemed so distant now, as if the world itself had shrunk to this small clearing where she stood alone, looking out over the vast expanse of trees. She had changed so much. Her body was stronger now, toned from the intense training she had pushed herself to complete every day. The soft curves of her figure had transformed into something more defined, a reflection of her inner strength. The transformation wasn't just physical. Every day that passed without Lucas, she had come to realize that she was becoming someone new, someone capable of standing tall on her own. But despite the growth she had achieved, despite the steady march toward independence, a part of her still ached with the memory of Lucas. That part of her that had once hoped for something more between them, the part that still longed for him, no matter how hard she tried to suppress it. Her heart told her to be cautious, to protect herself from the pain of loving someone who had abandoned her. But her mind told her that her strength was not just about her body, it was also about her ability to heal from the past. She heard the rustle of leaves behind her and instinctively tensed, her body going alert. It was Lucas. I know I've done wrong, Amy. Lucas's voice broke the silence, his tone low and hesitant as he approached her from behind. But I need you to understand, I never wanted to hurt you. I was weak and I made mistakes. But I've been trying every day to be better. Not just for me but for you. For the child. Amy's hands clenched into fists and she turned to face him, the pain of his words cutting through her like a knife. She hadn't seen him in days and yet here he was, standing before her, asking for forgiveness. It wasn't easy to listen to him. Every part of her wanted to yell at him, to demand why he had left her in the first place, why he had abandoned her when she had needed him most. You left me when I needed you the most. Amy's voice cracked as she spoke, though she tried to steady herself. You rejected me without any explanation, without any regard for how much it hurt. How do I know that you won't just leave again? Lucas looked down, a deep guilt filling his eyes. I never meant to leave you, Amy. I thought I was protecting you, trying to keep you safe from the weight of the pack. I was wrong. I see that now. And I can't change what happened, but I want to make things right. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm asking for the chance to show you that I can be different. That I can be the wolf you need, the wolf our child needs. Amy's heart fluttered at the mention of their child. She had known, of course, that the baby would always be a part of their story, but hearing Lucas speak about it made her feel something different. Something tender and raw, as though the reality of their shared responsibility was finally sinking in. I don't know if I can trust you again, Amy said softly, taking a step back. I don't know if I can open my heart to you. But I will not let my child grow up without both parents. If you want to prove yourself, then show me, Lucas. Show me that you can be the wolf you say you are. But know this. If you hurt me again, I will never forgive you. For the sake of our child, I will never forgive you. Lucas nodded solemnly, his gaze never leaving hers. I understand, Amy. I won't fail you. I won't fail our child. Amy turned away, her heart torn. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the man standing before her was the same wolf she had once known, the same wolf who had once promised to love her. But trust was something she could not give freely. It was something that had to be earned, and Lucas had a long way to go before she could fully trust him again. As she walked back toward the camp, she felt a sudden weight on her chest. It wasn't just the physical toll of the training, or the emotional weight of her unresolved feelings for Lucas. It was the overwhelming responsibility of being a mother. She was carrying a life inside her, and that life depended on her. And for that child she had to be strong, stronger than she had ever been. The next morning, Amy woke early, her body already accustomed to the routine of the camp. She couldn't sleep much anymore. The constant hum of thoughts, of plans and worries, kept her awake at night. It was the sound of her future. A future that was both exciting and terrifying. She spent the early hours in the woods, pushing herself harder than before. Training had become her refuge, a way to clear her mind and regain control over her own life. With each punch, each kick, she felt herself shedding the past, becoming more and more the wolf she was meant to be. As she trained, she couldn't help but think about Lucas. His words lingered in her mind, and part of her felt that flicker of hope again. But she quickly squashed it. She wasn't going to let herself get distracted. She had come so far already. She couldn't afford to let anyone, even him, pull her away from her purpose. Her body was stronger now, more agile. The muscles in her arms and legs were firm and defined, and her stamina had increased tenfold. She could feel the power in her own limbs, a power that she had once hidden beneath layers of insecurity. But now there was no room for weakness. She was learning how to be the wolf she had always been meant to be. After hours of training, Amy paused to catch her breath, sweat dripping down her face. She stood tall, her chest rising and falling with each breath, her body thrumming with energy. This strength, this new sense of power, was hers and hers alone. No one could take it from her. But as she stood there alone in the clearing, she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. She had only just started to tap into her true potential, and there was so much more to come. Later that day, Lucas approached her once more, this time with a more respectful distance. He didn't speak immediately, simply watching her train as she perfected a series of movements. It was only when she stopped, wiping the sweat from her brow, that he finally spoke. "You're incredible," he said, his voice full of awe. Amy gave him a curt nod but didn't respond. She wasn't interested in flattery. "I want to be a part of this journey, Amy," Lucas continued, stepping closer but still giving her space. "I want to prove that I'm here to stay. For you. For our child." Amy turned to face him fully. She had no idea where this would lead. Whether they would be able to repair what had been broken. But one thing was clear. She was no longer the wolf who had depended on him. She was a wolf in her own right, strong and capable. "I'm not doing this for you, Lucas," she said, her voice firm. "I'm doing this for my child. For me. If you want to stay in our lives, you have to earn it. You have to show me that you're worthy of being a part of our future." Lucas nodded, his gaze soft but resolute. "I will. I promise." Amy stared at him for a long moment before turning her gaze to the horizon. There was a new sense of purpose burning inside her, a sense of determination that she had never felt before. She wasn't sure what the future would hold. But she knew one thing for sure, she was ready to face it. Amy's return to the rogue camp was an emotional whirlwind. Her encounter with Lucas had been devastating. Everything she had tried to suppress came rushing back, and the flood of memories and emotions left her exhausted. Despite the rawness of her heart, she had resolved to focus on the child growing within her. That child, she realized, would be her strength, and everything she had learned from her time as a rogue had built her into the woman she was now. A woman who would not bend to anyone's will, not even the alphas. The night was quiet, but the tension inside her chest was palpable. She stared into the fire, its flickering light casting long shadows over her face. The rogue camp had become her sanctuary, but now it felt like a prison, holding her captive in its quiet corners. Kieran sat next to her, his presence calm, steady, comforting. She had been grateful for his support since her arrival, but tonight, something about his silence made her uneasy. He could tell that she was conflicted, and even though he had never been one to pry, he couldn't help but wonder how long she would keep her distance from the truth. "You're still thinking about him," Kieran remarked, his voice gentle. Amy's eyes met his, her lips parting in a heavy sigh. "How can I not? The bond between us is still there, Kieran. Every day I can feel it pulling at me. It's like a constant ache. But I'm not sure I can trust him. I don't even know if I want to." Kieran leaned back against a nearby tree, crossing his arms over his chest. "I've never had the bond with a mate, but I've seen it. And I've seen it tear wolves apart. But I've also seen it heal them. It's up to you, Amy. Whatever you decide to do, I'm with you." Amy nodded slowly, grateful for his words. But it wasn't enough to calm the storm brewing inside her. It had been years since she had allowed herself to rely on anyone, least of all a man who had rejected her when she had needed him most. But now she was no longer the same wolf she had been when she first left the pack. She had fought for survival, and she had fought for the life she had now. She wasn't sure if Lucas could ever be part of that, but she couldn't deny that something still lingered between them. Later that night, as Amy lay in her tent, staring up at the fabric above her, she couldn't silence the thoughts swirling in her mind. If Lucas truly wanted to make amends, what would that look like? Could she allow him back into her life for the sake of their child? Was it possible for them to rebuild what had been broken? The next morning, Amy was still wrestling with those questions when the letter arrived. It came with one of Lucas' messengers, a young wolf who handed her the parchment with trembling hands. Amy took it slowly, her breath caught in her throat as she opened it. She read the words carefully, each sentence drawing her further into the web of emotions she had tried to avoid for so long. "Amy, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. The bond between us cannot be ignored, and neither can the responsibility I have for our child. I was wrong to push you away, and I can only hope that you can see beyond the mistakes of my past. I want to make things right for you, for the child, and for the pack. If you are willing, I would like to speak with you. Yours, Lucas." The words burned in her chest. She wasn't sure what hurt more, the sincerity she could feel in his writing or the way he had rejected her in the first place. How could she trust him now? Amy folded the letter carefully, her mind spinning. This was more than just an apology. It was a plea for a second chance, something she wasn't sure she was willing to give. She knew she couldn't make this decision alone, and that's when she realized she needed to talk to someone who understood her journey, someone who could offer her perspective. Later that day, Amy found herself seated across from Kieran and Zara. The fire crackled between them, and the air was thick with anticipation as Amy revealed the contents of the letter. Both listened intently, their faces neutral, yet their eyes were full of concern and understanding. "I don't know what to do with this," Amy said, running a hand through her hair. "I've come so far to build a life without him. He's hurt me. He rejected me. And now he wants to fix everything just like that." She snapped her fingers for emphasis. "I don't know if I can believe him." Zara, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Amy, I've seen you grow. When you came here, you were lost. But you found your strength. The question isn't whether you can forgive him. The question is what you want for your future, and for your child." Kieran nodded. "Exactly. If he's serious about making amends, that's something you'll have to see with your own eyes. But remember, you're not doing this for him. You're doing this for your child, for your own peace. Don't let what happened in the past dictate your future." Amy's gaze softened as she looked at both of them. She had been so focused on the pain of the past that she had forgotten to consider what she wanted for the future. The child she carried was part of that future, and no matter what happened, Amy was determined to protect them, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. "I just don't know if I'm ready to face him again," she confessed, her voice wavering slightly. "I've built something here, and I'm afraid it'll all fall apart if I go back." Zara reached out and placed a hand on Amy's shoulder. "The strength you've built here will always be with you. Whether or not you go back, you'll never lose the person you've become. And if Lucas is truly sorry, then that's something he'll have to prove to you. In time, you'll see if it's worth your trust." Kieran added, "And we'll be here for you no matter what you choose." Amy nodded, her heart still heavy with uncertainty. But for the first time since receiving the letter, she felt a glimmer of hope. hope that she could heal from the past for herself and her child. But before she could even think about what her future with Lucas might look like, she needed time to decide. Later that night, as Amy lay beneath the stars, the bond between her and Lucas continued to call to her. A quiet, persistent pull. She couldn't ignore it. But now, more than ever, she was determined to make sure that whatever she decided, it would be for her. And for the life growing inside her. Days passed and Lucas's letter remained in Amy's tent, tucked safely away, her fingers tracing its edges every once in a while. The pack's influence was still far-reaching, but the rogue camp was slowly building a community, one where she could see a future for her child. Then one morning, as Amy was out for a walk to clear her thoughts, the messenger appeared again. This time it was different. Lucas himself stood at the edge of the camp, his posture stiff with tension, his eyes filled with regret. "I had to see you," he said, his voice low, steady. Amy's heart beat faster. But she stood her ground, her expression unreadable. "What do you want, Lucas?" He took a step closer, but not too close, respectful of her boundaries. "I know I've hurt you. And I've been given the time to reflect on what I've done. I've made mistakes, Amy. But I can't fix them unless you allow me to show you." Amy's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an admission of guilt. It was a plea for the possibility of something between them again. "I've been living with this regret for so long," he continued, his voice shaking slightly. "And I know I've destroyed the trust we had. But if there's any chance for us, for our child, I want to be a part of it." Amy felt the familiar pulse of the bond in the pit of her stomach. She wanted to scream, to run, to lock herself away from this moment. But she didn't. She stood still, facing him, her mind racing. "I'm not asking you to forgive me, Amy," Lucas said, his voice full of emotion. "I'm asking you to let me prove that I can be the father our child needs." Amy's gaze softened just a little. "Prove it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Amy watched as Lucas took another tentative step toward her, his eyes full of hope and determination. Despite the softness in his gaze, Amy could see the wariness in his movements, the way he held himself just slightly back, as if unsure whether or not she would let him closer. The weight of his words hung in the air between them. She had never truly allowed herself to hope for anything more with him. Not after the rejection, not after the pain he had caused. But now, standing before her, there was something different in his presence. He wasn't just the mate who had rejected her, he was the father of her child. And whether she liked it or not, she couldn't just cast aside the bond that still lingered between them. "I've made mistakes," Lucas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not the same wolf who left you behind, Amy. I've been through a lot since that night. I want to show you that I can be a better mate, a better father, if you'll give me a chance." Amy felt her heart constrict. Could she trust him? Could she risk opening herself up to the possibility of a future with someone who had hurt her so deeply? The last thing she wanted was to return to a life of uncertainty, to allow him back into her heart only for him to break it again. But as she stood there, she realized that the decision wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the child growing inside her. That child needed both of them, whether they were together or not. And if Lucas was willing to try, if he was willing to prove himself, maybe that was all she could ask for. "You've had time to think about this, Lucas," Amy said, her voice steady but firm. "But now it's my turn. If you truly want to be a part of our lives, you have to prove it. And I'm not going to make it easy for you. You don't get to come back just because you say the words." Lucas nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I understand. I'm ready to do whatever it takes, Amy." Amy sighed, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him. But trust was something that had to be earned, and she wasn't ready to hand it over just yet. "Then you'll have to prove it step by step." The days that followed were difficult, each one a test of Lucas's resolve. He was a wolf of action, and every moment spent with Amy, every gesture, every word, was aimed at proving that he had changed. He helped with the camp, took on responsibilities without hesitation, and did everything he could to earn the respect of the rogue wolves who had once seen him as nothing more than the alpha's son. Amy watched him closely, scrutinizing his every move. She wasn't the same naive wolf who had fallen for him all those years ago. The bond between them still tugged at her, but she had to remain strong for her child, and for herself. She couldn't afford to fall back into the same patterns that had caused her so much pain. Despite the physical distance she maintained, there was a shift in the air between them. The more Lucas worked to earn her trust, the more Amy found herself drawn to him, though she kept her emotions in check. She couldn't allow herself to slip into old habits, even though every part of her wanted to believe that the man standing before her now was different. One evening, after a long day of tending to the camp, Amy found herself walking along the edge of the forest, lost in thought. The bond between them was undeniable, and the pull of it was growing stronger with each passing day. She couldn't keep denying the attraction that was slowly reawakening in her heart. But she also couldn't let her guard down completely. A rustling in the bushes broke her from her thoughts, and she turned to see Lucas stepping out from the shadows. He looked at her, his expression unreadable but his eyes filled with something deeper, something more genuine than she had seen in the past. "Amy," he said softly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know you're still uncertain, and I understand why. But I just want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I'm ready to fight for you, for us, for our child." Amy's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time she allowed herself to look at him fully. The years of pain, of uncertainty, all seemed to fade into the background as she saw the sincerity in his eyes. "I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you, Lucas," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "But I will give you a chance to prove yourself, to prove that you can be the wolf I need by my side. And if you fail, I won't hesitate to walk away. For my child's sake." Lucas nodded, his face softening with relief. "I won't fail you, Amy. I promise." The air between them was thick with unspoken words, but for the first time in a long while, Amy allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future. A future where she and Lucas could build something together. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was a start. As the days passed, Amy felt herself changing, not just physically but emotionally. Her growing bond with Lucas was still tentative, fragile, but it was growing stronger with each passing moment. She could feel the child inside her responding to their connection, a small flutter of movement reminding her of the new life she carried. It gave her strength, a sense of purpose that was greater than anything she had ever felt before. Lucas continued to prove himself through actions rather than words. He spent more time with the other rogues, gaining their trust and respect. He never once faltered, never once gave up on trying to show Amy that he was serious about making things right. One evening, after a long day of work, Amy sat by the fire, her hands resting gently on her rounded belly. The baby inside her kicked again, stronger this time. She smiled softly, her heart swelling with love for the tiny life that depended on her. "Hey," Lucas's voice broke through her thoughts, and she looked up to find him standing a few feet away. He was holding something in his hands, something small wrapped in cloth. "I've been working on something for you," he said, stepping forward and handing it to her. Amy took the cloth from him, unwrapping it to reveal a small wooden pendant, intricately carved with symbols that she recognized. Symbols of protection, of strength, and of family. "I wanted to give you something that shows how committed I am," Lucas said, his voice low. "This is for our child. To protect them. To show that no matter what happens, we'll always be here." Amy's throat tightened as she looked at the pendant, the weight of his words sinking in. She didn't know if she was ready to open her heart fully to him, but this small gesture, spoke volumes. It wasn't about the pendant. It was about the promise he was making, that he was willing to fight for them, for their family. With a deep breath, Amy nodded. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's beautiful." Lucas smiled softly, and for the first time in a long time, Amy allowed herself to believe that perhaps they could build something new together. It wouldn't be easy, but they were both willing to try. And that was a start. Amy stood on the edge of the cliff, staring out at the horizon as the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and gold. The rogue camp below her bustled with activity as wolves prepared for what was to come. The unease in the air was palpable. Every wolf could sense the brewing storm. The Bloodfang pack, led by Lucas's tyrannical father, had declared war on the rogues and any pack that dared oppose them. This wasn't just about the rogues anymore. It was about standing against oppression, about protecting the innocent from the cruelty of those who abused their power. And for Amy it was personal. Since her transformation, Amy had emerged as a leader among the rogues. Her strength, resilience, and unwavering determination had inspired them. She was no longer the insecure wolf who hid from the world. She was a force to be reckoned with. But this wasn't just about her anymore. She had a child to protect, a future to secure. Behind her, Kieran approached quietly, his footsteps light but steady. "You've come a long way, Amy," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "The pack believes in you. We believe in you." Amy turned to face him, her eyes glowing with resolve. "This isn't just my fight, Kieran. It's ours. The Bloodfang pack has terrorized too many for too long. It's time we stand up to them." Kieran nodded, his expression serious. "The others are ready. They'll follow you into battle." Amy's heart swelled with a mix of pride and fear. Leading an army was never something she had envisioned for herself, but now it felt like destiny. "We fight for freedom," she said firmly. "For our children, for the future." As night fell, Amy gathered the rogues around the campfire. The flames cast flickering shadows on their faces, illuminating their determination. Lucas stood among them, his presence a quiet but steady reminder of their shared history. "I know many of you are afraid," Amy began, her voice steady and strong. "I won't lie to you, this won't be easy. The Bloodfang pack is ruthless and they will stop at nothing to maintain their power. But we are not just rogues. We are survivors. We have endured pain, loss, and rejection, and yet here we stand. Together." The wolves murmured in agreement, their confidence growing with each word. "We fight not just for ourselves," Amy continued, her voice rising. "We fight for those who cannot fight, for the innocent who suffer under the tyranny of the Bloodfang pack. We fight for our future, for our children, for a world where strength is not measured by cruelty but by courage." The crowd erupted in cheers, their howls echoing through the forest. Amy felt a surge of pride and determination. They were ready. As the camp prepared for the coming battle, Amy found herself alone in her tent, her hands resting on her swollen belly. The baby kicked softly, a reminder of the life she was fighting for. "You'll have a better world," she whispered, her voice filled with love and determination. "I promise you that." A knock at the tent's entrance startled her. "Come in," she called. Lucas entered, his expression hesitant but earnest. "Amy, I need to talk to you." Amy stood, her eyes meeting his. "What is it?" Lucas hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I know I've failed you before. But I need you to know that I'm with you in this fight. Not just because it's the right thing to do, but because I believe in you. You've shown me what true strength looks like, and I want to stand by your side." Amy's heart softened, but she didn't let her guard down completely. "Lucas, this isn't about proving yourself to me anymore. This is about doing what's right. If you're here for the right reasons, then I'm glad to have you. But I won't let anything distract me from what needs to be done." Lucas nodded, his gaze steady. "I understand. I'll follow your lead." Amy studied him for a moment before giving a curt nod. "Then let's make sure we're ready." The night before the battle, Amy walked through the camp, checking on the wolves and offering words of encouragement. The bond she had formed with the rogues was unshakable, and their loyalty to her was clear. Kieran approached her as she stood near the campfire, staring into the flames. "The Bloodfang pack won't know what hit them," he said with a grin. Amy smiled faintly, her mind already on the battle ahead. "We'll make sure they don't." As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, the rogues gathered at the edge of the forest, ready to face their enemy. Amy stood at the front, her presence commanding and fierce. "For freedom," she cried, her voice echoing through the trees. "For freedom," the rogues echoed, their voices a powerful chorus. With a final glance at the camp that had become her home, Amy led her pack into the forest, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The forest was eerily quiet as Amy and the rogues approached the Bloodfang pack's stronghold. The towering trees seemed to lean closer, their branches whispering warnings of the violence about to unfold. Amy led the group, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of their hopes resting on her shoulders. Behind her, Lucas and Kieran flanked the pack, their eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of an ambush. The rogues moved silently, their footsteps muffled by the forest floor. Each wolf was prepared to give their all, knowing that this battle wasn't just for survival but for freedom. As they neared the stronghold, the scent of the Bloodfang wolves grew stronger. Amy raised her hand, signaling for the rogues to halt. She turned to face them, her voice low but commanding. "This is it. Remember why we're here. Stay together, fight for each other, and don't let fear control you. We fight as one." The rogues nodded, their eyes blazing with determination. The first clash came suddenly. A group of blood-fang wolves burst from the shadows, their snarls ripping through the silence. Amy met them head-on, her claws flashing as she tore through the first wave of attackers. The rogues followed her lead, their strength and training evident as they held their ground. Lucas fought by her side, his movements precise and powerful. For the first time, Amy saw a glimpse of the leader he could become. But she didn't let herself dwell on it. There was no time for distractions. The battle raged on, the air filled with the sounds of growls, snarls, and the clash of claws against fur. Amy's strength was unmatched, her movements a blur as she fought with a ferocity that left even the blood-fang wolves stunned. She was no longer the wolf they had underestimated. She was a warrior, a protector, and a mother fighting for her child's future. As the battle intensified, Amy caught sight of Magnus, Lucas's father, standing at the edge of the clearing. His eyes locked onto hers, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "So you're the one causing all this trouble," Magnus sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "I should have known you'd be a problem." Amy stepped forward, her claws flexing. "Your reign of terror ends today, Magnus. You've hurt too many for too long." Magnus laughed, a deep, menacing sound. "You think you can stop me? You're nothing but a rogue, a mistake." Amy's eyes blazed with fury. "I'm more than you'll ever be. I fight for something greater than power. I fight for freedom, for family, for love." With a snarl, Magnus lunged at her, his claws aimed at her throat. Amy dodged swiftly, countering with a strike that sent him staggering back. Their fight was brutal, each blow landing with bone-crushing force. Magnus was strong, but Amy's determination made her stronger. She fought with everything she had, every ounce of pain and strength fueling her. She thought of her child, of the future she was fighting for, and it gave her the power to keep going. Meanwhile, the rogues held their own against the blood-fang wolves. Lucas led a group of fighters, his leadership finally shining through as he protected his pack. Kieran fought valiantly, his loyalty to Amy and the rogues unwavering. The tide of the battle began to shift. The rogues, united and determined, overwhelmed the blood-fang wolves, their training and unity proving to be their greatest strength. Amy's fight with Magnus reached its climax. With a powerful strike, she knocked him to the ground, her claws poised at his throat. "It's over, Magnus," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Your time is up." Magnus snarled, his eyes filled with rage, but he didn't move. He could see the resolve in her eyes, the strength that he couldn't match. Amy stepped back, sparing his life. "Leave. And never come back. If I ever see you again, you won't get another chance." Magnus glared at her, his pride wounded, but he knew he was defeated. With a low growl, he turned and fled into the forest, disappearing into the shadows. As the dust settled, the rogues gathered around Amy, their cheers echoing through the forest. They had won. The blood-fang pack was defeated and their freedom was secure. Amy stood among them, her body bruised and battered, but her spirit unbroken. She looked at the faces of the wolves around her, the wolves who had fought alongside her, and felt a surge of pride. Lucas approached her, his expression filled with respect and something deeper. "You did it, Amy. You led us to victory." Amy nodded, her gaze steady. "We did it. Together." The rogues howled in celebration, their voices carrying through the night. For the first time in a long time they felt hope. But Amy knew their journey wasn't over. This was just the beginning. They had won the battle, but the fight for a better future continued. And she was ready to lead them, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The morning after the battle was calm, the forest blanketed in a peaceful silence that felt almost surreal after the chaos of the previous night. The rogues had gathered at the edge of their camp, the glow of victory still lighting their faces. Though bruised and battered, they stood tall, their bond stronger than ever. Amy sat at the heart of the camp, cradling her belly protectively as the morning sun bathed her in its warmth. She could feel the baby's soft movements, a reminder of the life she had fought so hard to protect. Around her, wolves moved with purpose, tending to the wounded, repairing their camp and rebuilding their lives. Lucas approached cautiously, his steps deliberate as if unsure of his welcome. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes meeting hers. "You were incredible," he said softly. Amy gave him a small smile, her gaze steady. "We all were. This was a victory for everyone, Lucas. Not just me." He nodded, his expression filled with a mix of respect and regret. Amy, I know I've made mistakes. I've hurt you and I don't expect forgiveness. But seeing you now, I realize how wrong I was. You're stronger than anyone I've ever known. I want to be part of this future you're building. For you, for the baby. Amy's heart ached at his words, but she had learned too much to give in easily. Lucas, this isn't just about words. It's about actions. If you truly want to be part of this, you'll have to prove it, not to me but to yourself. He nodded solemnly. I will. Whatever it takes. The days turned into weeks as the rogues began to rebuild their lives. The camp transformed into a haven, a place where wolves could find safety and belonging. Amy's leadership became the cornerstone of their new community. She had proven herself not just as a fighter but as a leader who inspired hope and unity. Lucas worked tirelessly to earn his place among the rogues. He trained with the young wolves, helped repair the camp, and supported the wounded. Slowly he began to regain their trust and Amy's. Kieran remained a steadfast ally, his loyalty unwavering. He often stood at Amy's side, offering guidance and support as she navigated the challenges of leading the pack. Though their bond remained platonic, their friendship was unshakable, built on mutual respect and shared goals. Months later the time came. Amy's labor was long and arduous, but the pack rallied around her, their love and support unwavering. When the cries of her newborn filled the air, the camp erupted in celebration. Amy cradled her child, a boy with bright eyes and a strong grip. She named him Kale, a name that symbolized strength and hope. As she looked into his tiny face, she felt a surge of love so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. Lucas knelt beside her, his eyes filled with awe as he gazed at their son. He's perfect, he whispered. Amy nodded, her voice soft but firm. He is. And he'll grow up in a world where strength is measured by kindness, not cruelty. Under Amy's leadership, the rogues flourished. They formed alliances with neighboring packs, creating a network of support that ensured no wolf would ever be left behind. The Bloodfang pack never returned, their power broken and their leader disgraced. Amy became a symbol of resilience and hope, a beacon for wolves everywhere who had faced rejection and pain. Her journey had transformed her, but she never forgot where she came from. She used her experiences to guide others, teaching them that strength came not from power but from love and unity. On the anniversary of the battle, the pack gathered once again at the edge of the forest. They howled as the sun set, their voices a celebration of freedom and a tribute to the wolves who had fought and fallen. Amy stood at the forefront, Kale in her arms, Lucas and Kieran by her side. As the howls echoed through the trees, she felt a profound sense of peace. This was her family, her pack, her home. And as the first stars appeared in the night sky, Amy knew that she had not only found her strength but had created a legacy that would endure for generations.